want to thank you for being on the show. You're a California business broker and got a lot of experience in this space, and I think we're going to have a fun conversation today.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Ron. I look forward to this conversation.
Cool. We start in the same place almost every time. I kind of jokingly ask people, you were born, now you ended up on a show about mergers and acquisitions. Could you fill out the gap in between? How did you end up on my show, man?
Well, there were a few years in between those stages, but I grew up in the Midwest and I lived on the East Coast for a while. When I came out to California in the mid '90s, I went into the corporate software world and worked at companies like Oracle and Siebel Systems, BMC Remedy, and SUSE Linux. And then I really made a career change and decided to pursue something entrepreneurial. I took over a family business, and it was my father's, and my mother and sisters out of it. He had kind of a family emergency, and I stepped in. He sold commercial printing, almost exclusive catalog work, and worked with 4 printers and had a nice list of loyal customers. So it was a good business for him, and I saw an opportunity to expand it by creating some software, and that's what I did for 7 years.
Awesome. So you actually got to play the role of taking over the family business. I did that at an earlier stage of life. When I was 16 or almost 17, my father owned a painting and remodeling business, and he kind of just said, "You know what? You run it, and I'll work when I need a little extra cash to go fishing or something." He overseen it. It was kind of like I now see that it was him training me. But
Mm-hmm.
all all the people that worked there and helped us out all knew me as the guy that ran it, right? So it was an
Very
interesting
cool.
way. The fun thing was is I think I was an entrepreneur from birth because I told the story on the show before, but I asked him to probably at 13 or 14. I asked him if I could work for him. And he says, "Oh, you're not old enough. You're not old enough." Maybe a little bit younger than that. And I'd already worked a summer job stocking shelves at the local gas station where my mom had worked. But I wanted to earn some money, so I just grabbed the push mower. We lived about 5.5 miles from the nearest house. Like we were like from town.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, my next door neighbors had 3,000 plus acres, right? So we had a little 26-acre pecan grove. I grabbed my the family push mower and pushed it all the way into town and started mowing lawns. And after a week or two of that, my dad's like, "If you're willing to work that hard, I want you helping me." So
Yeah.
that started the going out and painting houses with my father. But you know, funny thing was I ran from that after about I was probably 20 when I joined the military. After all that, 3 or 4 years of doing it out in the hot sun and stuff like this is not what I want to do.
Hard work.
Yeah, there's got to be an easier way. So I wanted to go to college. It was horrible at saving money. I was taking all the money from, as a 16-year-old, I was probably bringing in 70, $80,000 a year, right? As a 16-year-old, but I spent it on paying for everybody's parties and taking all, I call my friends, say, "Hey, where you want to go?" And they're like, "Let's go to the movies." Well, then they're like, "I don't have any money." I was like, "I didn't ask if you had any money." I said, "Let's go to the movies." And I take like 11 people with us and 2 carloads. And so I just frivolously spent every penny I got. So when the time that came time, I was like, I need to go to college or something.
Mhm.
I didn't have anything saved. So I did the military thing. But let's jump into kind of, there's this kind of boiling up topic that everybody's asking about, and you and I talked about it before the show a little bit. The economy, the interest rates, and stuff. How do you see that impacting you know business brokerage, buying, selling businesses, the ability to sell your business?
Sure. So, I can speak from my own experience, and I'm pretty narrow in the type of clients that I work with. Part of a firm, and if somebody comes to me and it's not my niche, I'll refer them to a colleague. But I'm very focused on software businesses and services business, and there's a hybrid in between the two, which I call a software-enabled service, which is what my printing business evolved into. Um, and I think my general impression of what's about to happen here is, the interest rates are going up. The economy is going to wash out some of these companies that kind of aren't very well managed and aren't positioned in a competitive area or within a competitive position. And they're going to go away, and there's not going to be much there left to sell. But the good businesses will survive. And when you think about the discount rate that's applied to the valuation of these small companies, whether the interest rate is 3% or 6%, these businesses are getting discounted at 20 to 25 or 30% in the valuation. So I don't think it's really going to affect the valuation. I think it's just going to wash out the poor performers.
So I see that. I think we were talking about the show. I know it for me, it's impacting what I'm looking for. So I think it might do that with some of the other buyers as far as, what industries are we looking at, and kind of, are they recession proof? Do you think that's the case across the, that you think that's a personal bias of mine, or you think that's the case? A lot of buyers are going to take a second look at what they're thinking about getting into.
Well, I think it really depends on the type of buyer and the imagination. You had talked about coffee roasting, and I
Yeah.
would say, do you really want to own a coffee shop in like a downtown area where people may or may not be coming to work every day? Probably not a good business, but perhaps that's an opportunity to develop a coffee roasting business with one retail location and then ship those high margin beans all over the country. So, can you see a business that's failing or likely to, rapidly contract based on the new working environment? And then in your mind, come up with a new way of bringing those products to market and grow it into something very large. And I know out here, I'm in California and people are into gourmet coffee, but there's a number of small roasters that you would say, oh, this business is gone because people aren't coming into work. But they've gotten boxes and UPS machines, and now they're shipping their beans all over the country, and they're buying bigger and bigger roasters, which tells me, business is good and growing. Um, and so I think you can kind of make those leaps in a lot of different industries, and you can get your foot into maybe a slightly declining local business at a big discount, and then you can reposition it for something that can achieve and be successful for the next 10 or 20 years.
So you're right in the heart of Silicon Valley, right? I lived right. We were talking about this before the show. I lived probably 5-10 miles from you, for in the early 2000s for about 9 years. Worked up and down that valley. Is the reason that you're in that software and that stuff is just because that's what's abundant around you, or is it because that's what your background's from?
Um, I would say it's both. And I would say that, most of my clients are not local because a venture backed startup does not use a business broker. Those are those are either grow very quickly and become large public companies, or the funding gets shut off and they decline. Most of my clients are, bootstrapped. It's an engineer who had a product idea, it grew into a company. They have 20 to 50 employees. They're generally not here. So I think that really what I can bring is, because I worked in this world, I do have contacts at these large public companies like Oracle and Microsoft, LinkedIn, blah, blah, blah. But I also understand the business. And I think the understanding of the software business from a business broker perspective is pretty unique. If you're doing 20 or $30 million, you'll meet lots of very knowledgeable investment bankers that can help you exit your business. But if you have a software company doing 3, 5, maybe $10 million, there's not that many business brokers that can really navigate that. They don't have that kind of corporate or experience. And I think that's what I bring.
I guess it's I was kind of making the assumption you would end up dealing with a lot of divestors and stuff because where you're located. Do you get very many of those where the bigger companies are trying to divest of some software company or piece of a software company that they had bought that they don't really need?
Um, that no, I
Okay.
haven't found that. It's usually just an owner operator, and the private equity funds are very active at cold calling and trying to engage in a non-competitive transaction.
Oh yeah.
And the best client of all for me is when one of those deals falls through, and the seller has just said, I just spent $50,000 in accounting and legal fees, and you're not interested in my business anymore. What just happened? That's a great client for me because they've been through the process and they know what to expect.
I
It
get
all
that.
creates competition. So,
I actually had a gentleman on the show that he has a defense or a software security type of business, and he only gets like, I asked him what his sourcing deal flow was, and the reason I was asking about divestors is he's got connections through all that, and he buys a lot of companies divesting. They buy a bigger company that had a software arm doing a different product, and they
mhm.
didn't want that product at all, so he buys those. But so let's go into, kind of just what is it, the heart and soul? How do you evaluate a software company or the in your business, are the valuations different? Because I know the mom and pop brick boring companies I have usually sell between 1x to 3x, and that's just kind of cookie cutter. Um, I know a little bit about the software space, and that those evaluations are both a little more complex because recurring revenue, and
Mhm.
often above that multiple.
Yeah, so software companies are somewhat unique. They can be so desirable that people don't even pay attention to SDE and EBITDA. They're looking at top line revenue growth, which I don't know of any other industry where that exists. And it's just the amount of competition and interest there is from the buyers. Um, but yeah, recurring revenue with low churn is highly valued, and you can get multiples. I don't know, up to 4 or 5 times recurring revenue. Um, Services revenue and like custom engineering work is less valuable because you really can't predict, when the when the next payment will go through on the credit cards. But yeah, it's slightly different, and I think what throws people off if they haven't done a lot of software transactions is they get into trying to do a multiple off of earnings, and that really breaks in this space because a software company can grow so quickly that the earnings multiple essentially doesn't make any sense.
I get that. It was interesting that you said it was off of revenue because there's very few. I don't know if there's any other. There probably is, but industries where there are multiples off the revenue as opposed to the. I mean, you can always calculate it, but you know, um, I can get it. I understand why, just because a lot of the companies are doing the acquisition, they're publicly traded, and all they're trying to do is increase shareholder value.
Hmm.
So by acquiring something, plus a lot of times they're acquiring for the talent. So
Right.
some of these software companies get bought because of what engineers and software, experts you have on staff, and it's
Mhm.
so hard in this valley to hire great people that it just makes sense to buy those companies for the talent.
It does, and it's very hard to decide if the company really has strategic value and who that buyer would be versus a financial value. And what we read in the press are all these strategic acquisitions, eye-popping multiples, and there are strategic acquisitions happening in the kind of lower middle market where I operate. But there, some are, I'd say half
Hmm.
you can find a strategic buyer, and then the other half is more of a financial buyer. It's a private equity fund that, it sees it as a standalone business. It could be bolted onto another acquisition, and there'd be some synergy. And then the idea is to grow it and sell it as a middle market company, 5 to 7 years down the road.
So if you got a listener out there and they operate a software company, what are your three top things they need to know before they sell? Is it any different than a brick and mortar company?
I would say that for a software company in the lower middle market, which is where I am, so 3 million to 20 million in revenue, the buyer pool is pretty limited, right? Because if your business is running well, it's going to be worth way more than the $5 million SBA loan. So it's very hard to sell this to a kind of a person, right, an owner operator, because they just can't come up with that amount of capital to buy it. So you're really looking at like a private equity fund. And the interesting thing about working with the private equity buyers is that they have a tremendous amount of capital, right? They're not cash constrained at all. Where they are constrained is with time. So getting the business properly packaged and put together so they can quickly say yes or no without spending, tens or hundreds of hours, I think is the key part in courting these types of buyers.
It's interesting. And let's talk a little bit about the structure of the deal because it is different. Usually an SBA loan, almost always, I would say 99.9% is 100% buyout, and the owner cannot be involved afterwards, to the fact that they can't own anything. The SBA has a guideline and it says you're buying 100% of the company.
Mhm.
Um, the opposite is typically true, from my understanding, from the private equity, in that private equity wants to leave some of the equity with the original CEO and have them stay around and do an earn out or um, to operate the company. Is that
Mhm.
true in most cases?
Um, it is, and I'll broaden this, but there
Yeah.
4 or 5 different types of
Hmm.
buyers. Really understanding, what my client, the seller, wants in terms of their next 5 or 10 years of their professional life, lets me know who to approach, right? So a private equity fund is not a long-term buyer. They're
Yep.
a buy, grow, and flip, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Yep. Yep.
if you're okay with your business being sold again in 5 to 7 years, that's potentially a good pool of buyers. But you got to remember that a private equity fund is really a financial buyer, and they're managing an asset portfolio. They're not operators. So they need somebody that's able to show up to work every day and run the business. And this is kind of the shortcoming of working with a private equity fund. If you look at like a family office, there's absolutely no intention of flipping. They're going to own that thing for 15 or 20 years. They want to grow it as big as they can, and then they're going to pull out distributions. So it's a very different approach, and depending upon what kind of business and what kind of, I guess, values that the seller has, you kind of know who to pursue.
It's interesting is I had Adam Coffey on here, and he grew a heat and air one. I think it's the second one to $1 billion in revenue, and we were talking about that process. They sold that to private equity, I think, if I'm not mistaken, like 5 times, and each time they wanted him to stay on as a CEO. So he sold like 80% of it, got to keep 20 or whatever, and then they sold 80%, of that. And you just, if you look at that, there's a way inside of this. You can get multiple paydays if you're a good operator, you don't mind hanging around, and you're just looking for ways to increase your wealth and exit to a private equity where you remain in and have assistant growing it, because those guys are they're acquiring other companies and plugging them into you. There's a lot of stuff going on. If you're a great operator, I don't know there's a faster way to considerable wealth than working through that process.
Oh, I completely agree. The buyers that come with institutional capital, whether it's a private equity fund or a corporate strategic buyer or a family office, these guys are very sophisticated and very bright. And if you have the type of personality where you can work well with those types of people and in a collaborative way, I think that there's tremendous. 1 + 1 is 3. Right? Because these guys are going to bring a perspective and a capital and access to talent that, as a small business owner, there's no way you can come up with this by yourself.
So is there any difference between like the family office and the private equity owner as far as what they're looking for? Considering one wants to flip it and needs an operator, and the other one's going to hold on to it for long terms. Is there a different way to prepare each of those?
I think it's what the business is and how defensible the position is. So, I would say like some type of a consumer focused software or a SaaS business is probably more of a private equity play because they have a short time frame and they really want to hop on the trends and grow it, whether it's some kind of a consumer product or a business application. Whereas, if you have a software product that's, well developed and mature, so not much engineering effort, and you control a small niche that, it can't be very large, so the big public companies won't consider it. But it's completely defensible, and there's no way that, Google and Microsoft and those other players can get in there. That all of a sudden becomes a candidate for family office because the business has to survive for 15 or 20 years. That's their time frame.
I get it. So
So
I
it's,
love a
I
good.
guess,
Go
making
ahead.
a classic versus a hit movie, right?
Right.
The private equity guys are looking for the hits. The family office is looking for a classic that people will watch every year, and they'll continue to collect the royalties off of them.
I got it. I got it. So I love a great story. Tell me about one of your favorite deal transactions. Like, you don't have to name the company. I know there's non-disclosures and all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So whatever you feel comfortable sharing, what's one of your favorite deals you helped facilitate?
Um, I can talk about a software company that I sold, where there were two partners. One guy was in his mid-60s and had really devoted most of his working life to the business. He'd been in it a little over 20 years and, pulled a small salary, but certainly did not get wealthy from owning it and running it. And he had brought on a younger partner who was in his mid-30s, very capable, um, software master's degree in computer science from a very well-respected school. And the younger guy ran the business day to day. The older guy kind of stepped back and was doing more accounting and receivables and kind of strategic plans. And they needed to sell. And, you know, in a normal business, the young guy would take out an SBA loan and buy the guy out at the time. But with software company valuations, there was no way to get that amount of capital. So we, you know, we packaged it up and went to market, and we met just a number of very impressive buyers. I think we got 14 offers,
Wow.
two large public companies and private equity. And anyway, we got way more than what the financial value of the business was. And the younger guy was actually hired by the buyer, a large public company, and given a you know, a very high level role with guaranteed, you know, impressive salary for many years. And you know, not only did they both get a fair amount of cash, but it really, the young guy, who, you know, still had lots of ambition and drive, really got moved up onto a kind of a global stage from what was a, you know, a small platform that he was working from in the past earlier. So it was just a great deal all around, not only financial but also in terms of everybody's career.
Awesome. So is there a horror story that you're willing to share? Like just something like terribly went wrong and there, you know, or maybe even something that has a great value learned, lesson learned that you know, you'll avoid next time.
Well, you know, I'm pretty new at this business brokering job. I've been doing it a little over 3 years now.
Hmm.
You know, most of my clients are great. I have a client now who's, you know, I mean, we're in due diligence. This deal's going to close. I'm going to miss talking to him every week because the deal's going to close, and we'll both be on to the next thing. They're great. I had a client in the past that just refused to listen. And you know, I guess my takeaway from that is it's a partnership, right? I'm not your vendor. I'm your partner.
Hmm.
And you know, I'm going to see all the dirty laundry that's hidden in your financial statements and understand both the good and great, you know, decisions that you've made along the way, and also see some of the mistakes that have been made. And if you don't have that kind of personality to work collaboratively, I'm not going to be able to find you a buyer, because the buyers are bright and they're going to get into the details and find out what's happened. And if you can't say, hey, you know, I tried this and it didn't work, and this is what I learned, and this is how we pivoted, if you become defensive, you know, none of these deals will ever close, because the buyers can't work with somebody like that. You know, it's a transaction between two people in the end. And if you're not the kind of person that's trustworthy over the 12-month transition, you know, nobody's going to risk capital with you.
I think the other side of that is if you try to hide any of that, we're gonna, you know, buyers are gonna find it, and then you just destroy trust. You know,
Oh yeah, you
if
have to get out in front of it.
yeah, it's one of those. If I find something that should have been disclosed and it wasn't, th- it's just natural to go, okay, what else are you not telling me?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And you know,
So,
everybody appreciates how hard it is to be an entrepreneur, and they like, you know, if you say I tried it, it didn't work.
yeah,
I think that's more attractive to a buyer than you know, not disclosing, not talking, making the business seem really simple, which none of these are, or everybody would be doing it. It's really just it's a transaction between people, and you need that kind of personality to work collaboratively, I think, is what I've learned.
I'd love to actually have conversations with business owners and find out what didn't work and why it didn't work. Because that's my first question: is what didn't work about it,
Mhm.
right? And the reason is you're handing this something. If we're buying this, we already see what works. It's on the books. I've got, you know, hopefully I've got some operating procedures around it and everything. But knowing what you've tried, how you know how you went about trying it, and why you feel like it didn't work, is very valuable in the fact that anybody buying something thinks they're going to grow it, right? They
Right,
think they're gonna go out and try things and grow it.
right.
And you know, I've had one guy, you know, he almost sunk his business with something he tried, and didn't end up buying the company. But I honestly think the only reason it failed, what he tried, is he was probably about a year and a half too early, right?
Would be.
You know, it's you know, I just moved back to the Bay Area. I'm about an hour and a half north of you. I'm in North Bay now, and you know, when I first lived here, it was the '90s. I used to solo fish the Sacramento River in a canoe, and people thought I was crazy. Now I see people out there. I mean, I was fishing for sturgeon in a canoe and having them drag me up the river. Now I see people
Right.
doing it on YouTube constantly in kayaks. And
Huh.
in the '90s, I was crazy. Now it's an in thing to do. Same
Right.
thing with some of these things in the business. Just because somebody tried it, they might have just been too early to the market.
Mhm.
And but just understanding what they tried, what when they tried it, you know, what they would have done different, that's considerably valuable information to have conversations about. It's another reason why I think the private equity guys and even myself are willing to leave some equity on the table for the previous owner, just to have a reason for us to chat on a regular basis, you
Hmm.
know.
Well,
And
and it's really, business is a team sport. So, you got to have a team behind you. And, some I've coached some of my clients to say, oh, I work, 70 hours a week. I work so hard. That's not attractive to a buyer, right? You're like, I work 40 to 50 hours a week. Sometimes I get called in the evenings, but, my staff is great. And if I got hit by a bus, the business will continue to operate. And that's what the buyers want to hear. They don't
yeah,
want to
that's what we want, right?
hear
I had
something
a
so fragile.
I got on the phone. A friend of mine was looking in the auto industry, and he I don't think I think he got it through a broker or one of the biz buy sell type of sites or whatever. But it was they did upholstery, they did window tinting, and you would think that's small, but they were doing 1 point. And this is in Oklahoma, towards Oklahoma City. They were doing like 1.7 million in revenue, tinting windows and fixing upholstery and stuff. So it wasn't that small.
Right.
And as we get to talking, they're asking the owner, well, or the broker, so what does the owner want to, sell? Well, he wants more time. He's a professional golfer. He wants more time on the golf course. I was like, cool. He's willing to stay on part time. And so my first response was, okay, what's part time? And he said, well, 30, 40 hours a week would be wonderful. I'm like, okay, wait a second here now. How many hours is he working? And turns out this guy is working 13, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week on this business. And he has not one, but out of 7 employees, he has two others. So three people are working those kind of hours. He had a window tinter. They out of all that business, I think 80% of it was the tinting, and one guy was doing all of it because he was on commission. He loved to work. He would work 15-hour days on a regular basis, 6 days a week,
Hmm.
and make a ton of money because it was commission based.
Right.
And the buyer I was working with, a friend of mine, is about to pass the bar, and I said, "Well, you do realize there's some labor issues here, right? You're about to pass the bar, and you're going to be under deep scrutiny. There's a couple of things you want to be hesitant. I don't think you can call that guy a 1099 employee the way he's doing. So there's a lot of stuff that
Right.
rose up. But when you did the math backwards, a lot of the sellers don't realize when we see that. I see you're working 90 hours and working three jobs. I have to, when you're adding back your salary or whatever, I got to take back and look at the three salaries it takes to replace you.
Exactly.
So they had three people working the jobs of six or seven, depending on how you broke it out. The
Well,
company wasn't
and the
very
question is,
profitable.
why is there so much labor involved in producing that amount of STE, right? Could the business be organized in a different way, or the pricing models changed to be more of a reasonable level of commitment?
Yeah, and that's great, but we're not turnaround buyers, right?
No.
We actually don't want to buy anything. We actually have to physically operate for more than a few weeks of getting used to it. So I can't bring in a single operator to replace the owner. I have to bring in three, and then I have to break that one guy's work down and have at least one apprentice underneath him in case he decides he's leaving and doing it on his own. There's just so many different things. When you broke down the model, the math just didn't make sense. It wasn't not nearly as attractive of a business.
Hmm.
So that happens in the software world too. I came from that space. I lived here in Silicon Valley. I was director of operations for some of the bigger IT companies and tech companies in town. And it was not uncommon to pull 60, 80-hour weeks, right?
Hmm.
I was responsible for all the computer systems for every outage they ever had. If it wasn't fixed within so many minutes, they had to get me on the phone. Uh,
Right.
even when I got all the way up to the senior director, everything escalates, right? So instead of being on the phone in the first 5 minutes of outage when I was a tech, now it might be okay. You're down for 30 minutes. You have to call me, um, but that's the way you get the stuff. So even in the software companies, I think you have this problem where, somebody acquiring it finds out you're pulling 80-hour weeks. There, that's
Well,
just
and if you're writing software and maybe you have a team of 5 or 10 engineers working for you, but you're the only one that can make like the architectural decisions, why is it so complicated that you're the only one that understands it? That's a big question for a buyer,
right.
right? Because that's not safe, right? That's owner dependent. And owner,
Single,
the hardest businesses of all to sell, big, small, doesn't matter. An owner dependent business can't be sold.
Yeah, the other side of it is a lot of times these guys, every client they have only works directly through them, right?
Hmm.
And that happens. It has to happen in the software side too. Like you're the lead sales guy. If something breaks or a service, somebody needs you to fix something or report a bug, they call the owner,
Right.
and that that just pretty much concretes you into you got cement shoes. You can't leave that company until you get somebody that can handle those
Right.
roles, right?
And I would say that applies to the sales and marketing too, right? I mean, if it's my reputation within a community or geography, you're not me. You can't replicate that. So, one of the first things I talk to people about is just, okay, day one, where do I find the next new customer? How, are people calling in? Are they on our? Do I have to go to a conference? How does that work? Walk me through that. And I'm surprised by how many people don't have a process and a system in place that sales, it's
It's
not
it's
written
it's
for.
more common than you think, right?
Mhm,
We did a roll up last year, and we were working on marketing agencies. In a matter, there was a team of us, M&A guys. There was about 8 of us that were on this company, and 3 of us were the acquisition side where we were out there talking to marketing agencies. In a matter of less than 200 days, like I think it was like 185 days, we talked to 216 agencies, and the common thread amongst them was finding good people, right? Like sourcing staff
mhm,
and lead generation. Now, you would think that marketing company. Now, there were a bunch of those companies. We were talking to lead generation companies also. They were finding their own leads, but
mhm,
a lot of these big marketing companies, COVID really impacted them because, I used to call it, wine, coffee, and elbows. If you couldn't bump
right,
their elbow or drink wine or coffee with them, they didn't land them. So they went to trade. A lot of these guys got all their customers through trade shows, through networking with
mhm,
somebody introduce one of your friends introducing you to the owner of this or whatever.
right,
And when COVID hit, they were just at a loss. So uh lead generation, finding how do customers find or how do companies find new customers. I'm not surprised when I hear a lot of times, oh, I'm the lead sales guy from owners, because he had to be.
right.
When he founded it, he started.
I can tell you that this is, we were talking earlier about how you could take a small business that may be declining revenue and transform it. I think this sales and marketing area is a huge potential, right? I have a client now who he represented a buyer on it early in my career when I was working on a deal. And he has a family law practice and he wanted to sell it. And he called me and I'm like, I don't think I do law firms because those are relationships, personal relationships between the attorney and the client. He's like, that's not what we're doing. He's like, we're finding our clients online through digital marketing and we're finding a lot of them. And I looked at the numbers and how he was doing it. I'm like, wow, this is a sales and marketing process just like a software company, and this will sell. Like, and there's been buyer interest. So even in a business that you would say this isn't how it works, if you can make it work, you could grow a fairly large company out of that idea.
And those are very appealing to, especially what he's got there as a law firm. That's a very appealing to other law firms because they're not taught that in college, right? They're taught how
Right.
to do law. So the fact that he's figured out how to digitally source new clients would be extremely valuable.
Hmm.
It's funny thing is, I found out through trial and error that you can't own a law firm, at least in Oklahoma when I was there, unless you're an attorney. Because I
Right.
was one of my businesses was a real estate investment firm. We spent so much money on attorneys. I was like, I'm just gonna buy a law firm and have them work for me, and then they can do other work on the side. And I talked to the state bar association. I just called the state bar association and asked what that process would look like, and they said you just can't do it. They don't allow
Yeah.
it.
That's
So
that's also true of a lot. Like I sold a group mental health practice. They had 50 therapists in Oregon, and you have to be a licensed physician in that state to own a medical practice. So that also applies.
that's interesting because there's a way around that. They're called medical service organizations. You can actually set an MSO or there's a dental service organization too. So to buy a medical facility, you can set that up in most states. I think like almost all but 2 states you can actually do a medical service organization or a dental service organization. That's what I was fishing for. Is there some type of legal service organization where
Okay.
I own the building, I own the systems, the processes, and everything else? And then I employ attorneys, and I can't tell them what legal decisions to make. Like if you own an MSO, you can't tell a doctor you can't prescribe this, you have to prescribe that. That's all.
Right.
That's banned. But you can, and a lot of people do. I have friends doing a dental roll up where they're buying up dental offices and. But they're doing it through dental service organizations, and they're not cheap. It's like they're not expensive. They're about $25,000 to $30,000 per state. So you have to set them up by state by state by state.
Okay.
But so if you ever have another guy that wants to sell it or something, and you want to think about it, there is a way around that. It's just that California is probably double that. Everything that's legal here is more expensive. So,
Of course. Like
but
tax sunshine.
yeah. So it's like my wife asked me to move. We're moving here. We're here now, and I was like, she was like, first. That's my first thing. I was like, you want me to move where? But I remember she didn't blink an eye when I told her I wanted to move where I wanted to move, take care of family. So now we're here. So for those of you listening to the show, the reason the backdrop's not my monkey anymore is I'm actually sitting in my tiny home in a forest in the middle of a redwood forest in California. So
Beautiful.
you and I need to go get coffee or something someday. I drink higher end teas most coffee shops carry them. Since I go down to the Bay, I haven't been down since I've been back, but I'll be down in the Bay a lot. I know a lot of people down there.
Okay, well, that would be great.
So, what's one common myth inside of this profession, and specifically to software? In your like, there's something that's commonly known or like commonly believed in the space that you know in most spaces. Is there anything out there you just wish didn't exist as a conversation?
I think this. So I'll flip something on its head.
Okay.
This idea that I'm going to start high with a very high asking price and negotiate down. I haven't seen that work, not once.
Yeah.
And the reason why is that just like I said before about the private equity guys, the people with money, with real money, they don't have a lot of free time, and they don't want to play this negotiation game. So I think it's better to put a fair price on the business using standard multiples or metrics, however the industry values typical transactions. And then you attract enough buyers that you create competition, because a lot of these guys, they're very competitive. And once they decide this is the business they want, they're not going to let it go. And the price goes up, and it's never, here's your check for $12 million, and you hand them the keys. It's always, well, here's a check for $10 million, and I'll pay you another $1 million in 6 months, and another $1 million in 12 months, and you have to work for this many hours. There's always deal terms, and but the competition not only pushes up the valuation, but it gets those deal terms to be more rational, because of course the buyers are going to try to overreach if they sense they're the only one that's interested.
It's interesting is I was smiling real big because I just thought about like the last time I've been to an auction is I really overpaid for a couple items there because number one, I really wanted them, and I didn't
Mhm.
like the guy bidding, against me was, kind of laughing and thought it was funny. So I was like, you can't outbid me. So you
Yeah.
end up getting in this little awkward, irrational, I want to say, war. About 8, 9 months ago, we were on the phone with somebody. He's like, "Hey, I've got two other offices, like, that are higher than yours." I was like, I had to say it. I was like, "I'm sorry, you should probably take one of those."
Mhm.
Because I was at where I needed to be, and I didn't even want to know what their offer was because I had the gut feeling if they told me it was like 10,000 or $100,000 more in this particular case than what I was offering, I probably would have tried to rationalize outdoing them. So at this
Right.
stage, I was like, I knew this was a starting of, them coming back and me going back and bidding this thing up. I was like, okay, I'm out. And uh,
But the other thing I'll say is that like the example I gave earlier about the software company that I sold to a large public company, we had 14 offers. All the buyers were, highly educated, extensive private equity finance experience. Everybody got the same financial statements and tax returns, and the highest offer was almost 3 times the lowest offer. So you give everybody the same information, and depending on what their plans are for the future, they're going to produce a different valuation. And
now I'm going to
that's
ask
the
for
most interesting
statist
part is all.
for statistical purposes. I want to ask this because I've asked this a lot of times when I've heard the story. Did the seller take the highest offer?
In the end, they did,
Okay.
but the final buyer, at some point, we had 3 rounds of bidding with the
Hmm.
top 3 or 4. There were two public companies and one private equity fund. The buyer liked them all equally. They're like, these are great guys. They all have different plans, but we could see working with these people for an extended period of time. Can you sharpen the pencil? We like this. We don't like that. Blah, blah, blah. They did take the highest offer because that buyer said, we're buying this. And at this point, you just tell us the best you can do. We're offering $1 more. And nobody's going to take this from us. So we can either, run through 100 iterations of this, or we can wrap this up now. And they wanted to get it in for that fiscal year with their taxes. So they're like, okay, this is the highest we could get. We went back to the number 2 and said, hey, could you push this up by 2 million? He's like, if I lose my job, but I'll bump this up a bit more, that we could still do it. But I understand the situation, and we realize we're probably not going to get this one.
That's interesting. The reason I asked that is most often, I would say almost 80, I'm guessing here. All the statistics on this show are made up in my own head.
Okay.
About 80, 85% of it, in my guess, is the highest offer is not the one that's accepted. It's the person and especially with the brick and mortar companies, it's the person who's taking care of the brand, the employees, right? There's a lot of
Well,
other factors that come in other than the number.
I would say that it's typically the highest cash offer, because there's always a deal structure, and somebody might come. I mean, I'll just throw numbers out. Let's say somebody comes and offers 12 million cash plus another million in a year, and somebody else comes and offers 15 million, but it's 7 million cash and 8 million over the course of 3 years. Typically, they're going to take the most cash up front, and it really depends on the employees and the time frame. If they're selling to a private equity fund, they know the business is going to be sold and probably changed. But if the buyer has a history of coming in and firing all the employees and changing all the contracts, that's going to be a big red mark, and it's unlikely to be accepted.
I didn't think about that. Buyer history. Actually, that would be a huge, especially in the P&E and the private equity and the family office. Is you could, I've never even considered that. That has a huge play into the decision making process. What do you do with What do they do with the last 3 companies they bought?
Well, even before that stage, when the offer is accepted and closed, it's they're making an offer. How many offers have they made, and how many deals have they crossed the finish line with? Because from a seller's perspective, usually in exchange for accepting an LOI, there's an exclusivity period, and I have to take the business off the market, and that slows. I mean, it's not devastating if the deal doesn't close, but it means restarting and then explaining why the deal didn't close, because it would raise the concerns from the other buyers that the first buyer found issues in due diligence. So, it's really asking for a fairly large commitment.
So we're about 40, 45 minutes into this. So I want to cover a couple things. What resources are out there if they're I don't know if the family offices have their stuff together, and so the private equity. From the seller's perspective, what resources are out there? How do they contact you? If they're thinking about, okay, I'm looking at exiting in the next 6 months, 3 years, somewhere in that range. Where do they need to start? What resources are available to them?
Well, people that have lower middle market size businesses are welcome to contact me. I'm open and willing to network, and I like meeting people and hearing their story, even if it turns out it's not a good fit. But 3 to 20 million in revenue, and let's say 20 to 50 or 15 to 50 employees in the U.S. Love to talk to you. I have a website that I run where I create some blog posts around my thoughts. So if I said anything interesting or controversial, there's probably a long form kind of article that I've written with those same ideas, because I tend to repeat. So that's davidjacobsbusinessbroker.com. I'm a very big believer in exit planning. I do have the SEPA certification, even though I don't use it in a formal way. But going through the exit planning exercise, even in an abbreviated form with somebody like me, or there's lots of people that can do exit planning, and getting an idea of what's the business likely to receive offers for, what are the tax implications. So working with your CPA, understanding what is documented and structured in your business, so that when it's time to go, time to sell, the business is well structured and ready for a transaction, I think is a really great first step.
Awesome, I appreciate it. And then for you guys that are watching the show, you already know that I've got his name up and his LinkedIn profile up there. For those guys who are just listening in, it's the standard LinkedIn, which is linkedin.com/in, David Jacobs. So actually, it's let me double check that. It's Dave
It's
Jacobs.
Dave S. Jacobs is my
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
yeah.
If you
I just
search for David Jacobs business broker, I should come up.
Yeah, you need to put the business broker. Your name's fairly common. I just did it this morning and we're connected. And I was like, I had to dig a little bit. But once I put business broker up there, it popped up. I could see it. But it's Dave's Daves Jacobs with an S dot. That's the name you have under your URL. So it'll be in the show notes and that stuff. So I want to ask my favorite question we like to talk about is what can my audience or myself do for you? What is it? What's your next step in your journey? How can we help you move forward?
So, I'm always looking for sellers who own quality businesses that have a real reason for selling. And, I see it as a partnership. So, if you are a seller and you're considering exiting your business, it's time to retire or something's come up in life, I'd love to hear from you. If you want to introduce me, I'm open to referral fees. If you're a broker that's representing a buyer and you're interested in one of my clients, I'm here to get the deal done. So I'm glad to pay referral and fees like that and share in some of the success fee that I earn through these transactions.
I love networking and networking meetings and stuff as I get out and meet people around this space and, and go through the different meetings I go through. I'll keep my eyes open for companies that fit your profile too. Nothing makes me happier than going, hey, I got a guy. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
Let's see here. I think that's it, man. Was there anything cool? Like what question? We asked a lot of questions. We covered a lot of topics. What should have I asked? What did I miss?
It was a good conversation and you're fun to talk to. So I really enjoyed it. There's not a lot of open mind. It's, the business brokering thing is really a transaction between two people. So, it's talking and networking. And, if you're a seller, talk to a number of brokers and get a feel for who you like. If you're a buyer, you want to meet not only this, which will help facilitate the transaction, but you really have to meet a number of business sellers to get a feel, and you'll find your way. It's I don't know. I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship, and buying a business is I think a quicker way to earn a living than trying to start something from zero. It's a hard road to try to launch from nothing.
Yeah, I think it's you got a higher chance of success too. When you buy one, it's up and running. It's yours to crash and burn, and hopefully you won't do that. If you look at statistics, the odds of starting something, having the market accept it, and then having it grow to something significant is very difficult. I mean, I did the math, and then the average, like if you look at, I think it coming down to like 1 in 2,000 companies that are actually started ever crossed $1 million revenue model. And again, like I said before, all the statistics on this show are made up in my own head. But if you look at the first 5 years, so many failed, and out of the ones that succeed past the 5 years, only a very small percentage of those cross that $1 million in revenue. And you can either play that game and go try to start 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000 businesses to cross that mark. You can go just buy one that's already there. So
Where there's a
well, I
process
appreciate it.
for achieving.
I appreciate having you on here, man. I think it was fun. If there's anything else you want to add, make sure people know how to get a hold of you. Your links are in the show notes. If not, I'll call it a show.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the conversation. It was great. Welcome to California, or welcome back.
Welcome back. Thank you very much. All right. Hang out for just a second after we're in.